What's up there, YouTubers and fellow riders? The Chemist back at it, cooking up another DIY for you. This is a real quick insert from beginning to my tutorial, and there are a few tools that you are going to need in order to do your own forks. And most of them can be created. You don't have to buy those expensive tools for a job that you're not going to be doing so often. And to me, it's better. It's cheaper in this route. You know, I'm always looking, to save a buck, like I always say. And you can create your own tools in order to do this job. After speaking to a few mechanics and asking them, what it entails, they really don't want to give you too much detail about the job because, or the tools that you need, because they're trying to make a buck as well. So you can go out and make your own. Now, for those of you, let's start off with some simple. You are going to need something similar to this if you want to do it. There's two methods. You can do it this way or you can do it that way. Either way, both works just fine. It all depends on your preference. Okay, so let's start off with this. I went ahead and purchased myself a U-shaped piece of aluminum and drilled two even holes on both sides so that the rod connects evenly across here. And you gotta have it even and make sure that when you do it, that you take your measurements well and that this sits evenly across both sides, these two holes, because this needs to pinch. And once you insert these into your spacer tube, it needs to be pinched evenly across and apply the same force. If one's higher than the other, your spacer tube's gonna kind of sit off at an angle, so you have to make sure that these holes it's very important that you get these holes directly across. Okay, so this piece of tube right here cost me, this piece of metal right here cost me about 10 altogether. I want to say about maybe about $18, this whole setup right here. But this piece of metal specifically cost me about $5. I had the metal company, or the metal place that I went to, which was UMC Metals, and they had this just laying on the shelf, and it was perfect fit. It had a nice wide gap in here where I could fit my tube in place and not worry about anything getting scratched or anything like that. Cost me $5 for this, $5 to drill this hole, and $5 to drill that hole. Now I could have came home and drilled it myself, but why, when they have the proper machinery that just puts it all through for me? So I didn't have to do that part. When I did come home, I went ahead and drilled in my own lag bolts here, so I can hold it onto this piece of wood, so that I didn't have to hold it in place or anything like that. And it makes the job a whole lot simpler when things are mounted up there and you are working by yourself. So that's a quick note. These threaded rods, I went down to my local Aces Hardware and Nut. I purchased both. I think together this cost me like maybe about $4 for these two pieces. I came home and I grinded them down myself. Okay, so that's a real quick tool to use. With this setup, you're also going to need a jack, a floor jack. Now there's a benefit to, there's pros and cons with using the floor jack. The floor jack is great for getting the fork disassembled. Okay, so once you get it all off and you want to release that cap up there, the spacer tube from the rest of the cap, well, this is great for that. As far as putting it back together, it's a little more complicated than that, and let me explain why. The floor jack itself doesn't push up directly up. It kind of pushes up at an angle as it raises up. This causes a problem when it's sitting, when your fork is sitting on there, so it's not giving an even push up when you're trying to reassemble your fork together, and that causes a teeter in the fork tube which sits on top of the spring as you're trying to compress it. So you eventually just wants to kind of buckle off to the side. So that was one problem that I encountered when I was doing this, setup. What I did was I went ahead and I spoke to one of my friends who does forks on the side and does mechanical work on his own bikes, and he had made this for doing fork replacements or fork rebuilds. This is just a piece of steel, a piece of tubing, thick in size. Let me push pause and I'll get you the actual measurements of this tube. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, so the diameter of the tube itself is roughly about 60 millimeters. Okay, it's about roughly about 60 millimeters in its diameter and its opening. Okay, and there's that. And if you're going to the hardware store or whatever, and you need inches, it's 2.348 inches, so about 2.4 inches almost if you're using a tape measure. So there you go, right there. Okay, now it doesn't have to be this tall. I mean, if you look at some of the tools out there, and even the ones that are shown in the book, theirs is only about this tall. Okay, the one that I'm using here today is roughly about 3¼ inches tall. But like I said, it doesn't have to be that tall. It just needs to be strong. So that's that. These again are just regular bolts bought from Aces Hardware, nuts and bolts bought from Aces Hardware, and I just grinded down the tips, or he just grinded down the tips, so that it fits nice inside those holes and holds it in place. Okay. So that's this piece. Now, like I said, they both work. With this piece, you are going to need ratchet straps if you're going to do it in this manner. And the ratchet straps, that's what these pieces are for. Your ratchet straps, you're going to need 2 of them. One goes on this side, one goes on this side, and you're going to crank down on those ratchet straps with a bar, a breaker bar inserted into here, extending out. And if I have a breaker bar here, I can show you. There we go. Here's a nice thick breaker bar. Just going to insert it in here halfway like that. And there you go. You asphyxiate your ratchet strap to here and the other side. And you start cranking down on it. So that's that method. This method worked for me getting it closed. You can do it to open it as well. Like I said, it's your preference. But it applied nice, even downward force, even though you're clicking one at a time and it's coming down few short breaks. It's a pain in the ass to click with one hand. I'm not gonna lie. That was the most difficult part, trying to hold everything together, get everything lined up, and you know. But in the end, as the end result, it got my my spring compressed nice and evenly, and I was able to get it all closed. So, pair of ratchet straps when you're using this. Okay. Another tool you're going to need, and this is something that I made, and it doesn't have to be as fancy as this. I was just trying to mimic the one that Motion Pro sells, and I do have that one in my bedroom. My friend also lent me that as well. But this is the only purpose for this is just so that it sits on top. Okay, it has no function other than to hold everything in place nice and evenly, and I got a nice flush mount, which needs to be flush against here to get the proper leveling. So when you're measuring your oil, you measure from this top line downwards. Okay, so when I knew that this is sitting flat against that, and I have grooves in here so that it sits in there, and I 3D printed this myself since I have a 3D printer, and so I made this part myself. Same thing for your measuring leveler. So this is exactly 100 millimeters. Yeah, 100 millimeters. There are many discussion topics on the forum that say go 120. I've seen a couple of videos that say go 130, 130 millimeters. So you're roughly measuring from the top of this, which is the top of this, okay, and going up or down, however you see fit to see it. 100 millimeters is what the book says, the service manual book says your measuring tool needs to be. So using this as my gauge, this is the flat piece, I just went to my Aces Hardware and purchased me 2 fittings, okay, so that I could attach my tube to. This is no more than a common tube. Maybe you don't have to use something as thick, whatever size or gauge that you're using for the front. For this is going to coordinate to what size tube you need to purchase in this. So this is all they had on hand, so this is what I bought. Okay, If I had, in hindsight, if I had to do it over again, I would have went with something smaller, not something so large. Okay, so smaller the better. Okay, but with the smaller tube, it might take a little bit longer to pull out the liquid from inside the canister here. So also, you're going to need a syringe. Okay, this is no more than your common syringe type for giving babies medication. Okay, so, and I asphyxiated to that. So there's nothing complicated about this. If you needed to create this on your own, I was trying to compare the diameter of this circle right here, and it is the same diameter of a Red Bull can. Okay, so technically you could get a Red Bull can, cut the top off where you drink from, use this to go through the hole of where you sip from, and put it all together. So there's a little helpful tip right there. You don't actually have to get something so nice and fancy. We just need to be able to measure from here to here as accurately as possible. That's it. So those are the tools that you are going to need. In hindsight, again, if I had to do this type of setup and just use this alone, I would need a regular hydraulic jack that just does the vertical motion, not like this. Okay, so this would have technically worked better for both applications, on and off, if I had a hydraulic jack that just went straight up and pushed the bottom of this piece up evenly. So at any rate, I hope this helps you out, guys. It helps you understand. There's a lot of tutorials out there on how to create your own, and if you're looking up for tutorials on how to make your own spring compressor, you're going to want to look up inverted spring compressor. Okay, so, and that will bring you up a shitload of results. If you're just looking for motorcycle spring compressor or spring compressor, you're not going to find what you need for inverted forks, and that's what we have on our GSXRs, inverted forks. Okay, so what else did I cover? The string. You're going to need a piece of string, obviously. Something not so thin. This is just regular. I just use regular kite string so that I could tie it around my rebound rod right here and help me, since I don't have an extra pair of hands or the ProMotion tool, which screws onto the threading of the rebound. So get yourself a piece of string. Doesn't have to be too thick, doesn't have to be anywhere, but it just does make sure that it's not thin enough so that it breaks on you. So if you're trying to use thread or something like that, don't do it. Go out and get some kite string. That'll help you out so that when you tie it down, I just have it fixed up right here so that I can grab it real instantly, or I can put tension on it by hanging it from something else. Okay, so to put tension on the string. Another tool you're going to need, if you don't have it and you need to make your own, is your spindle remover to remove your front tire. Some of you have the specialty tool that they sell. You can grab that on eBay and purchase that for about maybe $15 to $20 on eBay, which comes with 4 different sizes on it. And what you're looking for is a 24 millimeter hex, 24 millimeter hex bolt, and in order to stick into the spindle. Let me see if I have a picture of the spindle. Here's our spindle, which holds on our front tire. This diameter right here is a 24 millimeter. So what I did, instead of purchasing one and spending almost 20 bucks, I went down to my local Aces Hardware and I got myself a M16 bolt and 2 nuts. The nuts act as a both nuts act as a locking mechanism, so they're basically jam nuts. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to get some lock thread or thread lock or Loctite, whatever you want to call it, and place it on the screw and roll down your first nut, locking it into place. You're going to take your second nut. You're going to really soak all of it in the, soak it in the thread locker and tighten up your 2 bolts. You're going to let this sit overnight for 24 hours. Now, once it's done, you should Make sure you try to line them up as best as possible. See, I got it on there myself, and they're all evenly. And you can use either your socket, or you can use a large crescent wrench to get this off. I used a plumber's wrench, which is large in size, which I don't think I have it here right now. But you will most likely be able to get this off with a crescent wrench and an extension bar to give you some leverage. So this fits exactly into this hole right here, so that you can remove your front spindle. And before you actually try and take this off, you want to make sure that you loosen your front pinch bolts that are right here. Okay, so you loosen that side on your right hand side. If you're sitting on the bike, you're going to loosen these two bolts first, and then you can go ahead and remove that front spindle by using our specialty tool. Don't loosen the opposite side. This fork is missing right now, until you are able to get that spindle out. Once that spindle's out, you can go ahead and loosen this side and complete the process. One other tool that you are going to need, and it doesn't actually have to be a tool that you purchase, is the seal driver. This is the Motion Pro's seal driver, which is used to slide along and drive in that seal within your fork. Okay, you don't have to purchase this. This cost me $40. It's a great purchase. It's a great product. It's thick. It's got some weight to it. So and it feels solid. You don't need this. Okay, so if you want to seal in your forks, and if you're working like me on the fly, you don't have the tools, you can take your old fork seal off, place it over the new fork seal when it's in the tube, and pound on this using a large socket to place over it. And you hit this and you tap it in, and it works. Okay, so you don't need to get something so fancy as this. I have it. I'm not. What's the likelihood of me using it again in the next 32,000 miles or so when you have to do it, or if you just happen to bust another seal? Is about the only time that you're ever going to actually ever use this again. So instead of spending the extra money, save yourself a few bucks, and you can do it in this fashion. Just take your old fork seal, place it inside. Take your new fork seal, place it inside there. Place this on top of it as a cushion or as a buffer, and you can go ahead and pound in that, tapping it with a hammer, and that'll get you out of that pinch right there. So one item you're going to need, and this is very important if you're doing your steel bushings, and if you don't know what your steel bushings look like, here's one right here. This is the steel bushing that's inside inside the gold tube of your fork, and this sucker is really in there, and it's hard to get out. Inside the bushing, you got this PTFE coating, which it's an anti-friction coating in here, and as you can see, this one is all scraped up from me removing it. But in order to get this out, you're going to need a specialty tool in order to get it out. It's really in there, and your common fork or screwdriver is roughly going to take you hours to get it out. You basically stick your screwdriver in here and you kind of lift it up, trying to nudge it up one at a time. Only problem is when you're lifting it up, it doesn't all come up evenly, and so you have to work your way around, spinning the tube around, rocking it back and forth. And you might think it might be easy to come out because it has this crack in it. Negative. It is very hard to get out, and the first one that I did actually took me about maybe an hour and a half to actually get this out, and you can see how bad I tore it up. But since I was doing like almost a full rebuild, I had to have something. I had to create something in order to get this out, because it was tough. It was a bitch to get out with a fork and screwdriver, and you don't really want to scratch up the inside of the tube, because apparently when you stick your screwdriver fork in there, it's going to tend to slip. You're going to make notches around the ring, and you don't want to do that. So what I went ahead and did was I made a specialty tool to get it out. So what we got here is a rod that I purchased from Home Depot. It's a threaded rod. It's pretty long, and I use it more for leverage. That's why I kept it long in this manner. But you're gonna pick yourself up 2 nuts that fit on a threaded rod, a washer a large washer and 2 smaller washers, and that's all this is. All right, and what I've done is, instead of having a full round washer, I went and grinded down the sides because it's not going to fit inside there with the size that I had purchased. So I grinded down the edges, made them flat, and then I grinded down a tip on here, and not too sharp, it's really dull. You don't want a sharp tip because your goal is not to scratch the inside of your chrome tube, so, or your gold tube. So you make sure it's nice and soft, but still has a beveled edge on it. And I only did one side. And what you do is you basically just stick it inside the tube, slide it over to the side underneath the ring, lock it in place, and pull up. And it's kind of like a dent puller, giving you leverage to pull it out. But before you do that, you are going to have to stick a screwdriver in here or your fork tool and bring it up off the ring that's inside the gold tube. So you bring it up at an angle like that, and that's when you stick in your washer underneath this part. So you want to get it a decent size off so that it slides into place, and you just pull up, you slide your tool in it and pull up. So, and this is pretty much how it sits inside your gold fork when you're replacing your seal. So this is actually a seal that I took out. So one thing to note is, if you're only replacing just the seals, you do not want to scratch the inside of this. Negative. Once you scratch it, it's all done, and you got to pull it out. So you'll be doing the whole entire build, or you'll be purchasing the whole entire package for the whole entire build just to replace this part. Okay, so when you're removing this, when you're removing your seal, make sure you don't scratch this if you don't intend to remove this with your rebuild. Okay, so I hope that helped y'all guys.